Richard Dawkins stripped off Humanist award over transphobia.
I can barely remember anything that happened, so hopefully I don't mess this up. A. So the American Humanist Association stripped Richard Dawkins of his Humanist of the Year award given to him in 1996 for his contribution to communicating scientific concepts to the public after his recent comments demeaning Black and transgender people. The offending tweet, posted on the 10th of April, read as follows, quote, in 2015, Rachel Dolezal, a white chapter president of NAACP, was vilified for identifying as Black. Some men choose to identify as women, and some women choose to identify as men. You will be vilified if you deny that they literally are what they identify as. Discuss, unquote. This was followed by a weak clarification that, quote, I do not intend to disparage trans people. I see that my academic discuss question has been misconstrued as such, and I deplore this, unquote.
This is Fox News level shit, right?
I know. It's so bad.
It's like,
Sorry, go on.
It's this whole I was just asking questions when it's quite clearly not just a question. Like there's so much leading there. You could start a caravan. You know. First of all, this issue is not fucking comparable at all.
Can we at least
go on.
Summarize the story and then we can.
Okay.
On the 19th of April, the American Humanist Association explained in their statement that, quote, Richard Dawkins has a history of making statements that use the guise of scientific discourse to demean marginalized groups and approach antithetical to humanist values. His latest statement implies that the identities of transgender individuals are fraudulent, while also simultaneously attacking Black identity as one that can be assumed when convenient. His subsequent attempts at clarification are inadequate and convey neither sensitivity nor sincerity, unquote. Stephen Pinker and Rebecca Goldstein, both former recipients of the award, wrote a letter in protest of Dawkins' withdrawal of the award 2 days later. The letter argues that, quote, reason requires that a diverse range of ideas be expressed and debated openly, including ones that some people find unfamiliar and uncomfortable. To demonize a writer rather than address the writer's argument is a confession that one has no rational response to them, unquote. They also cite the Humanist Manifesto 3, quoting, the instance of humanism is guided by reason, unquote. But they conveniently leave out the next clause, inspired by compassion. Okay, you had a lot of things to say.
Well, one thing they also leave out is the fact that humanism is based on the idea of dignity for all people, which Dawkins completely bulldozed right there. That's sort of like... so I had a lot to say, and I'm just trying to think about what it is now, because I've just blanked. That is one.
Sorry.
It's my own fault.
Anyway, I've got...
With the Rachel situation, like, the situation is not comparable. Ethnicity and gender are not even remotely similar. Also, like, this was put out, this was noticed by other people. Like, Rachel did what she did to gain a advantage, to exploit systems, etc. Trans people do not do that. Like, the violence we suffer is absolutely fucking horrific. No one is picking to be it, to get some sort of benefit out of anything. I just also really fucking hate the entire Rachel situation when it's brought up, because like, Rachel is a shitty person. That's undoubted. What she fucking did was disgusting. But at the same time, the only reason her parents came out about it now, I believe it's because one of her family members if I remember correctly, she's acting as a witness, or she was acting as a witness in a rape case. And they literally only released this information as a way of sinking her. So it's like, it's just a clusterfuck. Like, the whole fucking thing is just a clusterfuck, and the trans folks just latched onto it and just dragged it out every opportunity. Gender and ethnicity are not the same, okay? It's just the same whole thing as, oh, well, I identify as an attack helicopter. All you do by making this comparison, this argument, is you expose your ignorance to the whole case. Sex is a part of the human experience, and that part is going to be guided by the physical brain. I've just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've got notes to read through, and it's probably easier for you to like contribute to what I've already got down than for me to work around what you said. So just identified some problems with Dawkins' tweets. There's of course the uncharitable framing of what it is to be transgender, loading the question with like just full to bursting with assumptions.
Well, first of all, which is not some men choose to identify as a woman. So straight off the bat, I deny that there are women. That is a denial of who they are.
I got it. That's not how academic discussions are. At least not how they're supposed to work. How they actually work in practice is maybe a bit different, but it's not how they're supposed to work. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a comparison to Rachel Dolezal. Is just slaying a bunch of assumptions in there. There've been endless discussions about how it's not comparable. You know, race, for example, is inherited, whereas gender is not. Technically, your biological sex, but like you have people of all kinds of genders and stuff in a family. Mm-hmm. Whereas a family, you generally, there are mixed families, of course, but there are lots of families where you just have the one race. An argument I like to make is, with gender, there's a lot of nuance there, but you generally have the gender that's built around the female end of the sex spectrum and the gender that's built around the male end of the sex spectrum. With race, you don't really have that. It depends on your race and your culture depend on so many different factors. You can't, identify as one end of the spectrum or the other, because there's not even a spectrum there. I mean, there's like a spectrum of dark skin to light skin, but it's so much more complicated than that. The spectrums are not even comparable, but the spectrum of where you are in reference to the equator and like how much sun shine down on your generations of family is not comparable to the sexual the gender that has grown out of sexual dimorphism, which has grown out of our whole evolutionary history going back to the first life form. You can't compare those two things at all. And of course, the fact that Rachel Dolezal fraudulently became the head of the NAACP. If you were a wrong person might say that this is comparable to trans people who try to run for gender positions, like if a trans woman tries to run for a women's spot on some sort of board. If you were wrong, you might make that argument. But even if I pretend that argument is correct, not every trans person was doing that in the first place. So there's an unfair comparison to compare all trans people to this one person who fraudulently pretended to be black and ended up being on this board. Different constructs with different histories. That's a good way of putting it, but of course I had to go the long way around and kind of get a step.
Also, the fact that you can't change a person's gender. That's what psychology has shown us time and time again. If you try to change it, whether they're trans or cisgender, it will hurt them. Rachel, no one, there's no psychological harm induced in Rachel by not allowing her to co-opt, the black.
And if you listen to these people for 5 seconds, it's just so obvious they're just being racist as all hell. I remember reading one testimony from this one guy who's like, "Oh, I just feel better when I'm in Korean culture, so I must be Korean." It's like, no. I like a lot of things from different cultures, but that doesn't make me part of those cultures. It just means that other cultures have good ideas. But there's also, of course, as you pointed out, the assumption that trans people are birth assigned gender. Some men may choose to identify as women. Some women may choose to identify as men. It's already assuming that trans people are not who we say we are. Whereas that that's not even a question he explored at all. And then there's the assumption that trans people, he says choosing. the assumption that we choose our identity and not that it's whatever it happens to be, that we have no choice in that. And like these three things, if you were doing this properly, if you were doing this rationally,
Don't do it
skeptically,
on Twitter.
don't do it on Twitter. But like,
It's a bunch of
even if
random
you
people.
even if you did do it on Twitter, here's the thing: even if you did do it on Twitter, first of all, you'd have one discussion: is Rachel Dolezal comparable to trans people? Another: are trans people their birth assigned gender? Another one: are trans people choosing their gender identity? You would have those discussions first and figure it out based on the evidence, and only then could you have this other discussion based on these ridiculous assumptions.
Yeah.
Then we have the centering of cis people, complaining about the consequences cis people face for expressing transphobic opinions, without any acknowledgement for the extreme harm that's done to trans people when our identities are denied and we're discriminated against on that basis.
It's the whole sort of like dog whistling with Jordan Peterson sort of thing. Like that's what Dawkins is tapping into. He's directly tapping into the far right and the climate that people like Jordan Peterson have created. He's not quite going so far as to say you'll be imprisoned for like accidentally misgendering someone. But yeah, that would be vilified for it.
Yeah, and also like just I think tapping into that general desire to not have to deal with consequences or responsibility, to just be able to say what we want. All of that. And you know, these complaints about vilification specifically can actually be used to silence and shut down attempts to criticize transphobia or even explain what the problem is, which is important because later on all these people will be demanding explanations. But you know, this whole vilification thing, what I'm saying now probably will be shut down as a vilification, so we can't win. And of course it's also just, what the hell is he even asking us to discuss here?
That's what I'm on about. It's the faux news tactic, you know, make a string of like random fucking assertions and go, or discuss. Is it like, let's just like change it to discuss. You know, it's such a fucking coward's way out. And again, it really shows he knows exactly what he's doing is harmful. This is not a failure to consider what he's doing. He knows this is planned. This is exactly what they want to do. You know, someone who's been rather big on like, oh, you can't assume malice on Dawkins' behalf, has of course been Rationality Rules, aka Stephen Woodford. And I'm not surprised that he did it, considering before he had his trans athlete video out, he had already gone on transphobic tirades. He had supported Jordan Peterson in his standing up for free speech and biological fact in regards to Bill C-16, which just added trans people to pre-existing protections for marginalized groups. No extra like rules or whatever, no special considerations, just you are a protected category now. That's what that was about. You couldn't harass trans people anymore. Jordan Peterson, of course, got his name big because he literally declared, I am going to harass the students and the faculty at my university if they are transgender. That's literally what he stated. That is what he stated. He was going to harass these people, and he got turned into this free speech, defending the biological reality figure. That's what Rationality Rules was dog whistling back to. And then he reiterates this, and he even goes so far as to have the Jordan Peterson with a speech bubble saying, you're not an Apache helicopter, which is a callback to the far-right meme. Same with Ben Shapiro. In showing where he agrees with him, he shows Ben Shapiro's video, Ben Shapiro destroys anti-abortion and transgenderism arguments. He goes out of his way to specify, I disagree with Ben Shapiro on abortion, but the clips he plays and what he doesn't specify against are of Ben Shapiro making the why aren't you 60, argument against what I believe is a trans person, someone I believe is a trans person. And then I go, I'm not denying your humanity, I'm just denying you're the sex you say you are. It's like, you are denying their humanity. And this is what Woodford shows. Like, I agree with this. It's like, we knew his fucking motives with that trans athletes video. May not have realized it at first, and I actually gave him the fucking benefit of the doubt and told him, you can try fixing this. But, like, we fucking knew. The moment that evidence came to light, we fucking knew. He is deliberate. He is malicious about this. And it's the same thing with Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was poking at. All the dog whistles he was making, what he was calling back to, and he still chose to do it. Richard Dawkins, the vast majority of his life, has been a communicator. That's something a lot of people seem to ignore. These people, the people who do this, are communicators. It is their job to think about how this is going to be taken and the impact it can have. But that's always discounted, you know. We have to give bigots every possible, every ounce of doubt that, hey, maybe it's just an accident, maybe they didn't mean bad. We have to give them that, apparently. And that's just bullshit. Because ultimately, as Woodford has just proven time and time again, he is just going to keep stabbing you as you give him doubt. So, yeah.
Here's the thing as well, you can see I'm deconstructing all of these things they're saying. So if you want to say that this is an accident, you have to say they're less capable than I am. And if they're less capable than I am, especially at 10 or more years older than me, they honestly shouldn't be on YouTube.
And this wasn't even he was in a conversation and he said something bad. We could possibly say something bad at some point, you know, and end up and have to apologize for what we say because we're doing this live. He wrote this out completely unprompted and decided it would be a good idea. He decided, he knew. And again, as the American Humanist Association knows, this isn't the first time either. He's done this before. He's had it pointed out to him, and he just doesn't care. Another argument that Woodford made was, it's easy to lose sight of the big picture and who this harms when you're treating it like an academic exercise. It's what academia is being performed here. He posted shit to Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, asking random people for their opinions in a thoroughly transphobic society. That's not academia. Then again, Woodford doesn't know what academia is. He thinks he was academic when he refused to do research on the topic and the arguments he made, which he fucked up on the hemoglobin. Then he refused to read the annotation for the graph he put on screen as evidence of his argument, and then he just flat out lied about his future studies. You know?
But yes,
Sorry.
something I actually noticed reading over the tweet again is another assumption he made is that trans people think that... Okay, so with the language here, trans people think we're literally what we identify as. Technically, semantically, with our definitions, then yes, that's true. But what he means by it, that's not true, of course. What he means by it is that, I guess he could argue that he's just talking about a gender identity, but I feel like he's trying to slip in the idea that of this, delusional trans person who literally thinks they're the opposite sex, and a trans guy who'll go and try and use a urinal because he literally thinks that he has the opposite set of genitals and stuff. Even if he's just going for the weaker version of that, it's still a really bad faith assumption there.
Yeah.
Again, reiterating that we're not who we say we are, and just refusing to engage with the ideas on the level we're talking about, and just messing around with definitions. It's another one of those bad faith assumptions. Another thing that if he were being academic, he would go and research and why do trans people say that they're another gender or another sex when biologically whatever. And actually, if he did some listening, he might realize, there's a reason.
He's a fucking millionaire. He could fucking talk to any researcher he wanted.
Also, like, he's a fucking biologist. Okay, I didn't have notes on this, but in a tweet he said something about along the lines of, "Oh, a trans woman. I'll call her she to be polite or whatever, but she's not one because XY chromosomes." And it's like,
Yeah.
you're a fucking biologist. You know people don't know what their chromosomes are, and you know that chromosomes and pronouns have nothing to do. You're like, you're a biologist, and this is what you do. But yeah. Anyway, there's all these assumptions, and he's just kind of like expecting everyone to go along with him, even though he clearly hasn't looked into them at all. He's centering cis people. He's not considering trans people at all. He's being really unclear about what we're meant to be discussing. We meant to be discussing why, like, Rachel Dolezal doing bad things, or like whether, like, which of these weird assumptions are we meant to be discussing, or are we just meant to have a circle jerk about how hard cis people have it? I don't know. I don't know what the point is of this.
It's almost like a Gish Gallop, but it's not listed. Like, the assertion works so many assumptions into it that you just don't know which one to go for.
Yeah. But yeah, so we did that. The American Humanist Association decided, maybe not much for humanists. We'll take that award back. And then, of course, there's this letter, and this letter also has some problems with it. So this letter, it argues that Dawkins did not call for discrimination against or marginalization of any individual or group. And the thing is, they can't make that determination. Not only are they just wrong, not only is it obvious that publicly questioning the legitimacy of a group of people without even involving them is clearly marginalizing them. It's relegating them to a powerless position in society. But also, like, cis people, like we say it 1,000 million times, because apparently it needs to be said that often, cis people cannot decide what is discrimination against trans people, what is marginalization of trans people. We need to decide that. As Linda Dav has said, the absurd burden of proof put on marginalized groups to prove bigotry is a form of gaslighting. And like, when I read this tweet, I thought, this feels like discrimination. And then we've got these fuckers coming along saying this isn't discrimination. No, piss off. You have no right. And you're also just wrong, objectively.
Yeah.
The letter also argues that people should be able to enjoy rights without being beholden to responsibilities. Throughout this letter, I've linked it. You can read the whole thing if you want. It basically just says over and over and over again that, explain why he's wrong. We should be able to have these discussions. Whether or not Dawkins should have made these statements is treated as a black and white issue of, we should be able to debate this freely, versus thought crime, like literal thought crime. But there's a third option of expecting Dawkins to research this privately, educate himself, actually learn about the topic before speaking on it publicly, to take responsibility for the impact his questions could have, to maybe involve the people he's talking about even a little bit. That's not unreasonable. If this still sounds unreasonable to you, if this still sounds like thought crime, consider anti-vaxxers and people who believe in alternative medicine in general. The hashtag rationals love to drag anti-vaxxers, love to drag people who believe in like healing crystals and psychics and essential oils and all that, and tell them, you need to go and do research, you need to go and say the bad words, educate yourself, you need to learn the science, and you need to stop saying things you don't know anything about because it could hurt people. But the second it's not about these hard sciences, it's not about like the nitty-gritty physical medicinal side of biology or physics or anything like that, suddenly there's this double standard, because it's easier to feel clever when you're dragging people for being wrong about hard sciences than it is to feel clever when you're being humbled about the quote-unquote soft science.
Do you want to know the ironic part here?
What's the ironic part?
Like, it is the hard science of medicine because of the harm caused to trans people in denying them who they are. It's the same.
No, don't you understand? It's about how people feel, so it's a soft science. Because that's what the hashtag rationalstm is all about.
Yeah.
It's just the whole right wing facts over feels bullshit, but rebranded as skepticism.
Mhm.
Feelings can't be rational because I mean, like, rationality is meant to be not letting your feelings get in the way, but that doesn't mean you can't be rational about other people's feelings, and you can't do science about other people's feelings. And just because it's not rational doesn't mean it shouldn't be taken into account either. The other huge problem with this letter is, or another huge problem is it puts the burden of proof, and also I think it's very important to highlight the burden of labor that comes with that on the AHA.
Yeah.
The AHA is expected to explain why Dawkins was in the wrong, even though this information is readily available. It's widely available. It's not hard if I know why Dawkins is in the wrong, and like I managed to explain it all virtually off the top of my head. If I can if I can understand that all this, then there's Dawkins can understand all this. I'm not that smart, but you know that's not good enough. The AHA is expected to demonstrate the humanist value of rationality, while Dawkins is not expected to do the same by engaging in basic research and basic reflection on his statements and, you know, trying to figure out some basic criticism. It has to be spoon-fed to him, apparently. He doesn't have to do any thinking about what he says before or after, unless it's all spoon-fed to him in a way that cis people are comfortable.
And the thing is, like, Dawkins has a massive reach compared to any trans person. You know,
Yeah.
he can broadcast his ignorance to millions, whilst most of us can't do that. And he'll just ignore. That's the thing. That's another thing. Bigots will just ignore. He's had this shit explained to him because he has done shit before. He's not in the naive. He's chosen. He's chosen to be this way. Okay.
Yeah. And you know, if one of us said something wrong about something that these people care about, we wouldn't be able to turn around and say, oh, well, we're just going to assume it's true until you explain in excruciating detail that I personally approve of why I'm wrong. Yeah. You know, I'm allowed to, we should be able to engage in these discussions. So I should be able to be wrong about evolution. And you can't criticize me unless it's in detail and up to my exacting standards. You know, they don't want any responsibility whatsoever. And, you know, this also implies that it's oppression if marginalized people don't do all the work to clean up after bigots. And it implies that bigots should not be accountable for what they say about us. You know, they can make a huge mess, just, you know, metaphorically tear up all the rubbish in the bin and scatter it across the room. And it's oppression if we don't clean it all up for them and let them do it all over again as many times as they like. And that really goes back to the exhaustion effort we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Is because this is constantly happening, where bigots are making a massive mess, and we have to clean it all up, only for them to do it again and again and again.
And that's the thing, like, there's lots of people who like to run around saying, I'm a cis ally to trans people. If you were, you'd be helping with this, but that's the thing, they don't want to do that. They want to say a few words, get patted on the back, maybe get a few payments and Patreon sponsors and shirt sales, and that's it. That's where the work ends. That is the Jimmy Snow way of life.
Also Cyrus. And he also will add in the extra thing of telling us that we're not actually being oppressed when he doesn't personally like what we're saying. Or you know, that we're not experiencing transphobia if he doesn't like it. Yeah. He'll come out with the pitchforks and the torches when someone he doesn't like and someone his audience doesn't like is being transphobic, but the second someone he does like does something, and suddenly it's like, oh well, if we look at the definition and let's talk about my opinion. But,
so you're done with that?
Not quite. Okay. Another problem with this letter is it's remarkably privileged because the whole thing is written with the assumption that everyone is discussing these topics in good faith and that everyone can be reasoned with. It is. Who here has heard of the marketplace of ideas?
Oh, it's absolute crap. You know, that's the one. Also, the big signs of like rationality rules malice in all this. his big argument, his main argument in his first video is that hemoglobin doesn't change with HRT. One Google found studies, hemoglobin, because your blood is constantly cycling through your body and it's constantly being replaced, hemoglobin is changed by HRT. A genuine person who had made that argument, had come to that conclusion, would have gone, shit, I was wrong. Okay, I apologize, I take down my incorrect video, I'm really sorry. He didn't do that. No. He then moved on to muscle mass, I think it was, and then argued, oh, well, the range of trans women muscle mass exceeds that of, cis women. And that's where he made the mistake where he didn't know what the fuck standard deviation was, and he used standard deviation thinking it was the range when it wasn't, because he didn't read the fucking annotation.
What's very interesting about that is when I criticized him in one of my old videos before I started working here, is I pointed out that mistake. Mm-hmm. Like, that's actually the standard deviation, not the range. And I said, I'm not going to discuss the standard deviation. It's not really relevant, and I don't really understand. And since then, there's this one person in particular who will not stop dragging me for not understanding the entire graph. When, because apparently admitting you don't understand something, especially even if you know that it doesn't actually matter that much, is unforgivable. But pretending you understand something and getting it flagrantly wrong is that's completely fine.
But yeah, but he fucked up twice. Okay, he fucked up twice at this point, and seriously, surely someone who was genuine in what they thought would have stopped and gone, you know what, I'm just gonna back away from this. I'm gonna apologize, or even just delete my shit and go, just pretend it didn't happen. But he didn't do that. He cited a bunch of papers. I think there's 3 of them in his corrected version of his original video. Cited 3 papers. He made a bunch of claims about muscle twitch fiber type, heart and lung size. I think that was it. He also did bone density, but the bone density, the study he used completely disproved him. But the other ones he threw out there as supporting him with these studies. I went through every single one of those studies, and they weren't even mentioned. They did not come up. So he just flat out lied at that point. That shows clear malice. If you're wrong and you're proven wrong, you stop, you collect yourself, you reassess your position. You do not keep hunting for shit. He was doing the exact same thing that creationists do whenever you fruit on their points. He was bringing up a different point, and a different point, and a different point. He wasn't working on the basis, I'm going to look at the science and come to a conclusion. It was, I have a conclusion. How do I make the science fit it?
Yeah. So the marketplace of ideas. If you, I imagine a lot of you probably heard about this, but just in case you haven't, it's this idea that everyone can bring their ideas to the marketplace of ideas, and everyone will listen and think about them critically, and the best ideas will win, and the ideas that are rubbish because they're wrong or whatever, that no one will pay attention to them, and they will fade into obscurity, or they will be torn apart piece by piece. And we'll have this great rational utopia of great rationals, and it will be wonderful, and we'll all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. That's the marketplace of ideas with my extremely, what's the word I'm looking for?
Rose tinted?
I guess sarcastic twist on it. I'm being disrespectful and savage about it. I can't think of the word.
Facetious?
That'll do. My facetious twist on it. The problem, of course, is that that's not how it works, as, of course, Ethel just demonstrated with the whole rationality rule situation. He was wrong in very obvious ways, in very clear ways, in very embarrassing ways, and all he had to do to keep going was keep doubling, tripling, quadrupling, quintupling down. And he got away with it. Because this idea that everyone's going to be super rational about everything just isn't true. Snarky, that's a good word. This idea that everyone's going to be super rational about it just isn't true. And what's worse is the hashtag RationalsTM will use rationality as a way to actually ignore the truth when it comes to things like people's human rights. They'll take this super hyper analytical approach, or something that looks like it, to dismiss things like people's well-being and the impact your words could have on people, and make it all about, oh, we can't have these difficult discussions about what's true anymore. So this idea that everyone's arguing in good faith and that they can all be reasoned with and that we all want the truth, it is just a fucking lie, and it's so remarkably privileged at best, or it's malicious at worst for them to forward this. They also argue that everyone should have the freedom to make statements on other people's human rights without insisting that such a freedom should come with responsibilities, which lies in the face of the Humanist Manifesto 3 that they quoted, which states, quote, "We are committed to treating each person as having inherent worth and dignity, and to make informed choices in a context of freedom consonant with responsibility," unquote. So it's just being super privileged about this idea of just being able to say whatever you want without consequences. You know, ignoring the Humanist Manifesto 3 that they quoted, which goes right against what they're doing here. And they're also cherry picking it. You know, I mentioned before they cut off the quote early, but they also ignore, in addition to the reference to compassion, references to dignity, human need, ethics, responsibility, diversity, and more, which are, you know, all of these things about human well-being and human rights, and taking into account how people are going to be affected psychologically, emotionally, even spiritually by what you're doing. All of it is ignored in favor of this purely analytical, or what looks like a purely analytical approach to human rights. It's just peak white boy atheist. It's just,
Anyway, I think that's enough on that.